The Basement Monster. Chapter 1: The Invitation. Samantha was feeling restless. It had been a long time since she'd had a real adventure. Sure, she had her job and her friends, but nothing really exciting ever seemed to happen. So when an invitation arrived in the mail for a Halloween party at a supposedly haunted mansion, she was intrigued. The invitation was elaborate, with detailed instructions on how to get to the mansion and what to wear. It was signed by someone named Madame Zara, who promised that the party would be like no other. Samantha was hesitant at first, wondering if it was all just a prank. But as she read more about the party, she started to get excited. It was exactly the kind of thrill she had been craving. The night of the party arrived, and Samantha put on her costume, a black cat outfit complete with ears and a tail. She hopped in her car and followed the directions to the mansion, which was located on the outskirts of town. As she drove, she couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. The mansion was surrounded by a thick forest, and the trees seemed to loom menacingly over her. When Samantha arrived at the mansion, she was surprised to see that there were only a handful of cars parked outside. She had expected a huge party, but it seemed that only a few people had been invited. She parked her car and made her way to the entrance, where a tall, dark figure was waiting for her. "Welcome, Samantha," the figure said in a deep, gravelly voice. "I am Madame Zara. Please, come inside." Samantha followed Madame Zara into the mansion, which was decorated in a spooky but elegant fashion. There were cobwebs draped over the furniture and candles flickering on every surface. The other guests were already there, and Samantha recognized a few of them from her town. They were all dressed in elaborate costumes, and they seemed to be enjoying themselves. As the night went on, Samantha began to relax and have fun. She danced, chatted with the other guests, and enjoyed the spooky ambience of the mansion. But as the clock struck midnight, something strange happened. The music stopped abruptly, and all the candles flickered out at once. The room was plunged into complete darkness. Samantha's heart began to race. She couldn't see anything in the darkness, and she was afraid that something was about to happen. Then she heard Madame Zara's voice. "Welcome, my dear guests, to the true Halloween party," Madame Zara said. "The party of fear." Samantha's blood ran cold. She realized too late that she had made a mistake coming to this mansion. Something wasn't right here, and she was afraid that she wouldn't make it out alive. Chapter 2: The Haunted House. Samantha's heart was pounding as she and her friends entered the woods. The trees loomed above them, casting long shadows on the forest floor. Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. As they walked deeper into the woods, the sounds of civilization faded away and were replaced by the rustling of leaves and the chirping of birds. The group followed the path, but it soon began to twist and turn, making it difficult to keep track of their surroundings. After a while, they came across a clearing. In the center stood an old, abandoned cabin. The wood was weathered and the roof was caved in, but the structure seemed sturdy enough. Samantha's friends were eager to explore, but she felt a sense of dread in the pit of her stomach. As they approached the cabin, they noticed strange symbols etched into the wood. They were unfamiliar to Samantha, but they gave her an uneasy feeling. Her friends, however, dismissed them as just some kind of ancient language or markings. They cautiously stepped inside the cabin, which was filled with cobwebs and dust. Samantha noticed strange artifacts scattered about, including a rusted knife and a tattered book with a worn leather cover. Her friends picked up some of the objects, but Samantha hung back, feeling like they were intruding on something they shouldn't be. Suddenly, a loud banging noise echoed through the cabin, causing Samantha and her friends to jump. They looked at each other, their faces pale with fear. Samantha knew they needed to get out of there before things got worse. Chapter 3: The Unsettling Discovery. The group quickly made their way to the door, but it wouldn't budge. Samantha tried to push it open, but it wouldn't move. Her heart raced as she heard something moving around outside the cabin. She motioned for her friends to be quiet and listened intently. The footsteps grew louder and closer until they were right outside the cabin. Suddenly, the door creaked open on its own, revealing a tall, dark figure. Samantha's friends screamed and ran past the figure, but Samantha stayed behind, frozen in fear. The figure turned its gaze towards Samantha, and she could feel its eyes piercing through her soul. It didn't move, but Samantha knew it was waiting for her. She took a deep breath and tried to steel herself for whatever was about to happen. But then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. Samantha couldn't believe what she had just seen. She quickly caught up to her friends, who were already making their way out of the woods. Once they were out of the woods, Samantha's friends were elated. They had never experienced anything like that before, and they couldn't wait to tell their friends about their terrifying adventure. But Samantha knew that something wasn't right. She had a feeling that the figure they had encountered wasn't just some random occurrence. Over the next few days, Samantha couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time she turned around, she felt like someone was there, watching her. Her friends thought she was just being paranoid, but Samantha knew better. One day, she received a message on her phone from an unknown number. It was a picture of the cabin they had visited, but it looked different. The symbols that had been etched into the wood were glowing, and Samantha could see movement in the shadows. Samantha knew that something sinister was at play, and she needed to investigate. She gathered her friends and returned to the cabin, determined to uncover the truth about what had happened there. As they entered the cabin, Samantha felt a chill run down her spine. The symbols on the walls were pulsing with a strange energy, and she could feel an otherworldly presence in the air. Suddenly, the figure appeared before them once again, and Samantha knew that their investigation had just gotten a lot more dangerous. Chapter 4: The Terrifying Encounter. Samantha was determined to find out what was causing the strange occurrences in her house. She decided to do some research on the history of the property and discovered that it was built on a site where a gruesome murder had taken place many years ago. One night, as she was lying in bed, she heard footsteps coming from the hallway. She got up and cautiously opened her bedroom door. To her horror, she saw a shadowy figure at the end of the hallway. Samantha's heart was pounding as she approached the figure, which seemed to be moving closer to her. Suddenly, the figure vanished into thin air, leaving Samantha standing alone in the dark. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Samantha decided to set up a camera to capture any supernatural activity. She placed the camera in the living room and waited for something to happen. As she watched the footage the next morning, Samantha was shocked to see a ghostly figure moving around the living room. It was clear that her house was haunted. Samantha began to feel uneasy in her own home. The constant presence of the ghostly figure made her feel as though she was being watched all the time. She tried to ignore it, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. One night, as she was getting ready for bed, Samantha heard a strange noise coming from her closet. She cautiously opened the door, and to her horror, she saw the ghostly figure standing inside. Samantha screamed and ran out of the room, her heart racing with fear. She knew she couldn't continue to live in a haunted house. She decided to seek help from a paranormal investigator. The investigator came to the house and performed a thorough investigation. He concluded that the house was indeed haunted by the spirit of the person who was murdered on the property many years ago. Samantha finally had an explanation for the strange occurrences in her home. She was relieved to know that she wasn't going crazy and that there was a logical explanation for the haunting. The investigator performed a cleansing ritual to remove the ghostly presence from the house, and Samantha was finally able to feel at peace in her own home. She was grateful to the investigator for helping her put the ghostly presence to rest and allowing her to move on with her life. Chapter 5: The Escape. Samantha sat on the porch swing, her mind reeling from everything that had happened. She had never been so scared in her life, but she couldn't deny the thrill of uncovering the mystery of the haunted house. She was determined to find out more, to get to the bottom of what was happening in the old mansion. As she sat lost in thought, she heard a noise coming from inside the house. It sounded like someone was moving around, shuffling papers or knocking over furniture. Samantha's heart began to race, and she knew she had to investigate. She slowly got up from the swing and made her way back inside the house. The flashlight beam revealed nothing out of the ordinary, and the silence was almost deafening. Samantha tiptoed through the house, checking each room carefully. As she entered the living room, she saw something that made her blood run cold. There, in the center of the room, was a large circle of salt. In the middle of the circle, someone had drawn a pentagram in red paint. Samantha felt a wave of fear wash over her as she realized that someone had been practicing black magic in the house. As she stood there in shock, she heard footsteps coming from the hallway. She quickly turned off her flashlight and ducked behind the sofa, her heart pounding in her chest. The footsteps grew louder and closer until she could see the figure of a tall man moving towards the living room. Samantha held her breath and watched as the man stopped in front of the salt circle. He looked around the room and then began to chant in a language Samantha didn't recognize. Suddenly, the room began to shake, and a dark mist started to fill the air. Samantha tried to crawl away, but her body felt paralyzed, and she couldn't move. The man continued to chant, and Samantha felt like she was being suffocated by the dark mist. She closed her eyes and prayed for the nightmare to be over. When she opened them again, the man was gone, and the mist had dissipated. Samantha stumbled out of the house and collapsed on the lawn, gasping for air. She knew that she had to tell someone what had happened, but she didn't know who to turn to. She felt like she was in danger and needed to get out of there as soon as possible. As she stood up, she noticed a piece of paper lying on the ground. It was a flyer for a local paranormal investigation group. Samantha took it as a sign and made up her mind to contact them. She was determined to get to the bottom of what was happening in the haunted house, no matter the cost. Chapter 6: The Final Confrontation. Samantha took a deep breath as she slowly approached the door to the basement. She could hear the faint sound of scratching and shuffling coming from the other side. She knew that this was it, the moment she had been dreading. She reached out and grabbed the doorknob, turning it slowly. The room was dark and musty, the only light coming from a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. Samantha could barely make out the figure in the corner of the room. It was the creature, crouched down and watching her with its glowing red eyes. Samantha took a step forward and the creature let out a low growl. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she moved closer, determined to end this once and for all. Without warning, the creature lunged at her. Samantha screamed and dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding its sharp claws. She could feel her adrenaline pumping as she prepared to fight back. The two circled each other, both waiting for the other to make the first move. Finally, the creature lunged again, but this time Samantha was ready. She ducked under its outstretched arm and drove the stake into its heart. The creature let out a final, guttural scream before collapsing to the ground. Samantha watched as the body began to disintegrate, turning to ash before her eyes. She had done it. She had finally defeated the monster that had been haunting her for so long. As Samantha walked back up the stairs, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had faced her fears and come out on top. She was ready to face anything that came her way, knowing that she had the strength and determination to overcome any obstacle.